Hey guys, tonight we're stepping behind the thick stone walls of a place where the world is quiet, almost too quiet. We're wandering into the shadowed corridors of a medieval convent, a world of soft candlelight, whispered prayers, and the gentle rustle of woolen robes. But don't be fooled by the peaceful silence, because beneath this calm, shadowed surface lies a world of quiet struggles, whispered hopes, and hidden secrets. Here in this world of cool stone walls and flickering firelight, hundreds of women have lived, prayed, and dreamed, women who gave up the noisy, chaotic world beyond for a life of faith and contemplation. Or at least that's how it seemed. But as we're about to discover, within inside a medieval convent was anything but simple. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, I'd love to hear where you're listening from and what time it is. Let me know in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The thick, heavy doors of the convent swing open, and you step into the cool, shadowed hallway. The air is filled with the soft scent of beeswax candles and fresh herbs, and the faint, distant sound of whispered chants drifts through the still air. But here in this quiet, shadowed world, life is anything but peaceful. The nuns wake before dawn, their eyes still heavy with sleep, their hands clasped in silent prayer. The dim light of the flickering candles dances on the cold stone walls, and the soft, distant murmur of the night wind whispers through the narrow, arched windows. You see them now, silent, shadowed figures in thick, dark robes, their faces calm but pale, their eyes fixed on the cool gray light of the stone chapel. For these women, the day begins not with laughter, but with prayer, a whispered chant that rises and falls like the soft, steady sigh of the ocean. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto. Their voices rise clear and steady, their hands clasped, their gazes steady. But this is not just a ritual, it is a promise of faith, of devotion, of quiet sacrifice. But even as they stand together in the shadowed chapel, even as their whispered chants fill the cool, misty air, there is a quiet, unspoken struggle, because for some of these women, this life was not a choice. For some, the convent is not a sanctuary, it is a prison. You see a young woman standing at the back of the chapel, her hands clasped her head, bowed, her eyes fixed on the cold gray stone floor. Her cheeks are warm, her fingers trembling. Her name is Isabel, and she is not here by choice. Isabel was the youngest daughter of a wealthy merchant, a quiet, clever girl who loved to run barefoot through the tall green fields, her laughter bright, her hair tangled with wildflowers. But her father saw only her dowry, a fortune that he could save, by sending her to the convent, a promise that she would be safe, that she would bring honor to the family. And so she stands here now, her heart heavy, her voice a quiet, trembling whisper, lost among the steady, whispered chants. But Isabel is not alone. All around her you see them young women from noble families, sent here to protect their honor, quiet, shadowed figures who once dreamed of love, of laughter, of life beyond the cold gray walls. For some, the convent is a sanctuary, a place of peace, of faith, of light. But for others, it is a cage, a quiet, shadowed prison where their dreams fade beneath the cold stone arches. Yet even here in this world of whispered prayers and silent shadows, life goes on. After the morning prayers, the nuns file out of the shadowed chapel, their footsteps soft, their faces calm. The quiet shadowed corridors are filled with the soft rustle of robes, the faint sweet scent of fresh herbs. And then with slow, careful hands, they begin their daily tasks, sweeping the cold stone floors, polishing the thick wooden benches, lighting the tall wax candles that fill the shadowed halls with soft golden light. But even as they work, even as their hands move, with quiet, practiced skill, there is always a sense of quiet, sacred purpose, a sense that even the simplest tasks are a prayer, a promise of faith. You see an old nun, her fingers trembling slightly, carefully sweeping the cool gray stones of the chapel floor. Her voice is a soft, steady murmur. Work is prayer, my child. Each sweep a blessing. But for the younger nuns, the shadowed halls are a place of quiet, whispered dreams. You see Isabel again, her fingers brushing against the cool gray stone, her gaze distant, her voice a quiet, trembling whisper. Will I ever see the fields again? Will I ever feel the sunlight on my face? And yet, even in this shadowed, silent world, there is light. You see a young novice, her fingers brushing against the soft petals of a tiny wildflower, her smile warm, her voice a cheerful whisper. I found this in the garden, a light in the shadows. But even this tiny light must be hidden. The convent is a place of silence, of humility, of faith, a place where laughter is a sin, where dreams are shadows, where the light of the world is kept outside the thick, heavy doors. And so, as the soft, shadowed light fills the cool, misty corridors, you begin to see it, a quiet, shadowed world. A world of faith, of sacrifice, of silent struggle. A place where women pray in whispers, where dreams are hidden beneath thick woolen veils, where light is a distant, fading memory. Because for the nuns of the medieval convent, life is not just a prayer, it is a quiet, whispered promise. A promise of faith, a promise of silence. And even in the darkest shadows, that promise is a light that whispers, that flickers, but never fades. The soft shadowed light of the chapel fades behind you, and now you find yourself walking through the cool, misty corridors of the convent. The thick stone walls rise around you, their cold gray surfaces brushed with the warm, flickering glow of the tall wax candles. But here, amid the soft shadows and the gentle rustle of woolen robes, another rhythm begins, a rhythm of whispered prayers, of sacred songs of silent devotion. Because now it is time for prayers, silence, and sacred chants. For the nuns of the medieval convent life was not just a quiet retreat, it was a constant conversation with heaven. From the first light of dawn to the cool, misty twilight, their days were filled with whispered prayers, their voices rising and falling, like the soft, steady sigh of the sea. You see them now, shadowed figures, standing in the cool gray chapel, their faces calm but pale, their eyes fixed on the tall golden crucifix that rises above the altar. The soft, steady light of the flickering candles dances on their calm, shadowed faces, and their voices rise together, a quiet, steady chant that fills the cold gray air. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum. The words are ancient, whispered in a language older than their world, a language of faith, of devotion. But even as their voices rise calm and steady, there is always a quiet, unspoken struggle. Because for some of these women, prayer is a light, a whisper of joy, a promise of peace. Their eyes shine, their voices clear, their hands clasped in quiet, trembling faith. But for others, prayer is a shadow, a whisper of doubt, a reminder of dreams lost, of laughter silenced. You see Isabel again standing at the back of the chapel, her fingers clasped, her gaze fixed on the cold gray stones beneath her feet. Her voice is a quiet, trembling whisper, her heart heavy. For Isabel, prayer is not a light. It is a shadow, a quiet whispered promise she does not yet understand. But even as her voice trembles, even as her heart is heavy, she is not alone. Around her, the nuns sing, their voices rising and falling, their hands clasp, their faces calm. Because in this quiet, shadowed world, prayer is not just a private whisper, it is a promise shared. The day is divided by these sacred hours, each one marked by a quiet, whispered ritual. Matins, in the cool gray light of dawn. Lauds as the first warm rays of sunlight touch the tall stone walls. Prime terce, sext and nun. Quiet whispers that break the long shadowed hours of work. Vespers, as the warm golden light fades, and finally compline, the last quiet murmur of the night. But these are not just hours, they are lights, tiny sparks of faith that guide the nuns through the shadowed day. But even as their voices rise, even as their whispered chants fill the cool gray air, there is always a quiet whispered struggle. Because even in this world of faith, even in this world of prayer, there are doubts, there are fears. You see a young novice, her fingers trembling, her voice a quiet stuttering whisper. What if I am not worthy? What if God does not hear me? Beside her, an older nun rests her hand on the young woman's shoulder, her voice a calm, steady murmur. Prayer is not just words, my child. It is faith. It is light. But even the older nuns are not immune to doubt. You see an old woman, her silver hair hidden beneath the thick, dark veil, her eyes closed, her hands clasped, her voice is calm, her gaze steady, but there is a quiet, shadowed sadness in her face. God hears us. She whispers her voice, a quiet, trembling murmur. But do we hear him? Yet even in this quiet, shadowed struggle, there is always light. You see a young novice, her fingers brushing against a tiny silver cross at her neck, her voice a soft, joyful whisper. When I pray, I feel warm like sunlight. Her friend smiles, her voice a quiet, cheerful murmur. Like sunlight, I just feel sleepy. But even their whispered laughter, is a light, a tiny flickering spark that dances in the cool, misty shadows. Because even in this world of whispered prayers and silent shadows, there is always joy, a quiet, gentle warmth that whispers in the soft, steady chants. And these chants are not just words. They are stories, tiny sparks of faith, wrapped in the soft, ancient Latin. You hear them now, the stories of saints and martyrs, of miracles and mysteries. Stories of faith that shine like tiny lights in the shadowed chapel. But even as the chants rise, even as the soft whispered prayers fill the cool gray air, there are those who struggle, those who do not find peace in the whispered words. Isabel stands in the cool shadowed chapel, her fingers brushing against the thick dark veil at her shoulders. Her voice is a quiet, trembling whisper. I do not understand. I do not feel anything. Beside her, an older nun smiles, her voice a soft, gentle murmur. Faith is not always a light, my child. Sometimes it is a shadow that we walk through until we find the light. But even in this shadowed struggle, even in this quiet, whispered doubt, there is always hope. Because for the nuns of the medieval convent, prayer is not just a whisper, it is a journey. A journey from darkness to light, from doubt to faith. And even in the darkest shadows, that journey is a light that whispers, that flickers, but never fades. As the last quiet notes of Compline fade in the cool, misty air, as the nuns step quietly through the shadowed corridors, their hands clasped, their eyes calm, you begin to see it, a world where faith is a light, a whisper, a promise. A young novice smiles, her fingers brushing against the cool silver cross at her neck, her voice a soft, joyful whisper. Tomorrow we will sing again. And even as the cool, misty shadows wrap around the quiet, sleeping convent, even as the soft, golden candles flicker in the cold, gray air, there is always a quiet, gentle warmth, a light whispered in prayer, in faith and hope. Because for the nuns of the medieval convent, prayer is not just a ritual, it is a light that shines even in the darkest night. The cool, shadowed calm of the chapel fades behind you, and now you find yourself walking down the quiet, narrow corridor that leads to the convent's refectory, a long, simple hall where the nuns gather to share their meals. The thick stone walls rise around you, their cold gray surfaces brushed with the warm, flickering light of tall wax candles. But here, amid the soft light and the gentle rustle of woolen robes, another quiet, sacred ritual begins. Because now it is time for meals, fasting, and simple feasts. For the nuns of the medieval convent, food was not just nourishment. It was a symbol, a whisper of faith, a quiet, shared blessing. And even the simplest meal was wrapped in silence and prayer, in quiet devotion. You see them now, shadowed figures, filing into the long stone hall, their faces calm, their hands clasped. The long wooden tables are lined with thick, rough benches, and at the head of the hall, beneath the warm, flickering light of the great iron chandelier, stands the abbess. her calm, weathered face bright but serious. The nuns file into their seats, their robes brushing softly against the cool stone floor, their eyes fixed on the empty plates before them. But before even a single crumb is touched, there is always a quiet whispered blessing. The abbess lifts her hands, her voice a calm, steady murmur. Bless us, O Lord, in these thy gifts, which we are about to receive. The nuns bow their heads, their voices a soft whispered murmur. May it nourish our bodies and strengthen our souls. Only then do the young novices step forward, their hands carefully carrying the simple earthenware dishes that hold the nuns' humble meal. And humble it is thick dark fresh from the convent's smoky ovens, its crust warm and fragrant. A simple hearty vegetable stew, its warm savory scent drifting gently through the cool misty air. A small bowl of fresh herbs, their green leaves bright beneath the soft candlelight. But even this simple meal is a gift, a quiet whispered blessing, a promise of warmth, of comfort. The nuns eat in silence, their fingers brushing against the rough wooden spoons, their eyes calm, their faces peaceful. But even here, amid the quiet shadowed peace of the refectory, there are quiet whispered rules that bind the nuns every bite, every sip. For the nuns of the medieval convent, fasting is not just a sacrifice, it is a promise, a light that shines even in hunger. You see a young novice, her cheeks warm, her gaze fixed on the thick dark bread before her, but she does not eat, not yet. It is a day of fasting, a day of quiet whispered sacrifice. Her voice is a soft, trembling whisper for my soul, for my sins. But while the young nuns fast, while their thin fingers brush against the cool, empty plates, the older nuns eat in quiet, steady calm, because for them even fasting is a light, a promise of faith. And even on the days when the nuns do eat, their meals are humble, simple, thin porridge made from oats or barley, its warm, bland scent filling the cool, misty air. Fresh vegetables from the convent's garden, green beans, tender cabbage, tiny wild herbs. And on the rare, joyful days of feasting a small steaming fish, its silver skin glistening in the soft light. But even these feasts are simple, a reminder of humility, of faith, of quiet whispered gratitude. You see Isabel again, her fingers brushing against the rough, dark bread, her voice a quiet trembling whisper. Will I always be hungry? Will I always dream of the feasts I once knew? Because for some of these women, the convent is a shadow, a place where joy is quiet, where laughter is a sin, where hunger is a constant whispered companion. But even in this shadowed world, there is light. You see an old nun, her weathered face calm, her voice a quiet, cheerful murmur. Eat, my child. Even this bread is a gift. The young novice beside her smiles, her fingers brushing against the thick, dark crust, her voice a soft, joyful whisper. It is warm. It is enough. But even as the nuns eat, even as the soft, steady sounds of quiet whispered eating fill the cool, misty air, there is one more quiet, sacred tradition, a reading, a light that shines in the shadowed hall. At the head of the table, the abbess lifts a small polished wooden book, its thick leather cover worn but well kept. Her voice is a calm, steady murmur, her eyes bright. Today we read from the Rule of Saint Benedict, and as the nuns eat, as their fingers brush against the warm, dark bread, they listen the abbess's voice, a soft, steady light, a whisper of faith that fills the cool, shadowed air. But even in this quiet, sacred peace, there are those who struggle. You see Isabel again, her gaze fixed on the cool gray stones beneath her feet, her fingers brushing against the rough, dark bread. Her voice is a quiet, trembling whisper. I remember warm honey cakes, sweet wine, roasted meat. Beside her, an older nun smiles, her voice a soft, gentle murmur. That was the world, my child. Here we feast on faith. But even as the nuns eat in quiet, peaceful silence, even as the warm, golden light of the candles dances on their calm, shadowed faces, there is always a quiet, gentle warmth, a sense that even the simplest meal is a light, a blessing. And on the rare, joyful days of celebration, Easter, Christmas, the feast days of the saints, the refectory is transformed. The simple, humble dishes are replaced with warm, golden honey cakes, their sweet, fragrant scent drifting through the cool, misty air. The thin, dark porridge is replaced with thick, steaming stews, their warm, savory scent filling the air. And even the cold, clear water is replaced with sweet, golden mead, its warm, honeyed sweetness, a light that dances on their smiling faces. But even on these joyful days, there is always a quiet, sacred peace, a sense that even in the simplest meal, there is light, there is faith, there is joy. A young novice smiles her fingers, brushing against the warm, golden honey cake, her voice a soft, joyful whisper, a taste of heaven. An old nun smiles, her voice a calm, gentle murmur. Heaven is in our hearts, my child. And even as the warm, golden light of the candles dances on the thick gray stone walls, even as the soft, sweet scent of the honey cakes drifts through the cool, misty air, you see it, a quiet, shadowed world, a world where even the simplest meal is a light, a promise. Because for the nuns of the medieval convent, food is not just nourishment. It is a whisper of faith, a light that shines even in the shadows. The warm, fragrant air of the refectory fades behind you, and now you find yourself walking along a narrow, shadowed path that leads to the convent's garden, a quiet, peaceful space hidden behind the thick stone walls. The cool, misty breeze brushes against your face, carrying the sweet, earthy scent of fresh herbs and wildflowers. But here, amid the soft, rustling leaves and the gentle sunlight, another sacred rhythm begins. Because now it is time for chores, gardens, and herbal remedies. For the nuns of the medieval convent, prayer was a light, a whisper of faith, but it was not their only duty. Between the whispered chants and the silent prayers, there were always tasks to be done, hands to be kept busy, and one of the most important tasks of all was tending the garden. You see them now, shadowed figures in thick dark robes, their hands brushing gently against the soft green leaves, their fingers careful as they pluck the tiny fragrant herbs. The garden is a quiet, sacred space, a place of life, of healing, of light. But this is not just a place for quiet reflection. It is a place of hard, steady work. The young novices kneel in the cool, damp soil, their fingers brushing against the tiny, sprouting herbs, their voices a soft, cheerful murmur. Pass me the trowel. Careful, don't crush the thyme. Beside them, an older nun stands with quiet, practiced grace, her fingers brushing against the tall, swaying leaves of fresh sage, her voice a calm, gentle murmur. Sage for strength, rosemary for memory, thyme for courage. For the nuns, these herbs are not just plants, they are whispers of healing, tiny sparks of faith that bring light even in the shadows. You see a young novice carefully gathering a handful of fresh lavender, her voice a soft, joyful whisper. For the infirmary, for those who cannot sleep. But even as they work, even as their fingers brush against the cool green leaves, there is always a sense of quiet, sacred purpose, a sense that this garden is more than just a place of herbs. It is a place of light, of healing, of life. You see Isabel again, her fingers brushing against the soft green leaves of fresh mint, her voice a quiet, trembling whisper. It smells like the fields, like the world beyond. Beside her, an older nun smiles, her voice a soft, gentle murmur. It is a light, my child, a whisper of joy. But while the young novices tend the herb, the older nuns work with quiet, practiced skill in the small, shadowed infirmary, a quiet, shadowed room filled with the soft, sweet scent of dried herbs and the faint, smoky glow of the warm, crackling hearth. You see an old nun, her fingers moving with careful, gentle skill as she crushes fresh comfrey leaves, their dark green surface releasing a faint, earthy scent for wounds to speed healing. Beside her, a young novice carefully measures a few drops of peppermint oil into a small, polished clay bowl, her voice a soft, joyful whisper. For headaches, for tired eyes. These are not just herbs, they are whispers of healing, tiny sparks of light in the shadowed world of the convent. For the nun's healing is not just a skill, it is a sacred duty, a light that shines even in the darkest night. You see a young woman lying on a simple wooden cot, her face pale, her fingers trembling. Her voice is a quiet, trembling whisper. Will I be well? Will I see the fields again? An old nun rests her cool, gentle hand on the young woman's forehead, her voice a soft, calming murmur. Rest, my child, the light will return. And even in the darkest shadows, that light is always there, hidden in the soft green leaves of basil, a whisper of healing in the tiny fragrant petals of chamomile, a spark of life in the thick warm poultices of yarrow and comfrey. But even as the nuns work with their herbs, even as the cool misty breeze stirs the tall green leaves, there is another quiet sacred task, one that is both humble and holy. You see a group of young novices carefully sweeping the cool stone corridors, their voices a soft, cheerful murmur. Careful with the candles. Don't let the ashes scatter. For the nuns of the medieval convent, even the simplest chore is a light, a whisper of faith, a quiet, sacred promise. A young novice carefully polishes the thick wooden pews of the chapel, her fingers brushing against the cool, smooth wood. Her voice is a quiet, cheerful whisper. This is our home, our light. But even as they sweep the cool gray stones, even as they scrub the thick wooden tables, there is always a sense of quiet joy, a sense that even in the simplest task there is light. You see Isabel again, her fingers brushing against the cool green leaves of fresh sage, her voice a quiet trembling whisper. We work, we pray, but do we ever live? Beside her, an old nun smiles, her voice a soft, gentle murmur. This is life, my child, a quiet life, a sacred life. And even as the soft golden sunlight filters through the tall swaying branches, even as the cool misty breeze stirs the fragrant herbs, you begin to see it, a quiet, sacred world, a world where life is a light, a promise, whispered in green leaves and cool, fragrant herbs. A young novice smiles, her fingers brushing against the delicate white flowers of fresh elderberry, her voice a soft, joyful whisper. Elderberry for colds, a light in the darkness. An old nun rests her hand on the young novice's shoulder, her voice a calm, gentle murmur. And faith is a light, my child, a light that never fades. But even as the nuns work, even as their hands brush against the soft green leaves, even as the cool, misty breeze dances in the tall, swaying herbs, there is always a quiet, sacred peace, a sense that even in the simplest task, there is light. Because for the nuns of the medieval convent, the garden is not just a place of herbs, it is a light that shines even in the shadows. The sweet, earthy scent of the garden fades behind you, and now you find yourself stepping into the cool, shadowed stillness of the scriptorium, a quiet, sacred space where the air is filled with the faint, sweet scent of ink and the soft, delicate rustle of parchment. But here, beneath the tall arched windows and the soft golden light of the flickering candles, another quiet, sacred task begins. Because now it is time for the scriptorium writing and illuminating manuscripts. For the nuns of the medieval convent, prayer was a light, a whisper of faith, but some carried that light in a different way. Here in this quiet, shadowed room, the light of faith became words, words that danced across the cool, pale parchment, wrapped in delicate, swirling designs of bright, shining colors. You see them now, shadowed figures in thick, dark robes, their faces calm, their eyes fixed on the smooth white parchment that rests beneath their careful hands. The soft golden light of the candles dances on their calm, steady faces, and the cool, clear ink glistens beneath their careful, practiced strokes. But this is not just writing, it is a sacred art, a prayer whispered in silver ink, a promise wrapped in delicate, swirling designs of blue, red, and gold. You see an old nun, her weathered fingers moving with quiet, practiced skill, her voice a soft, steady murmur. Every word a prayer, every letter a light. Her fingers brush against the delicate silver quill, its sharp, polished tip dancing across the smooth white surface. Her voice is a calm, steady whisper. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. But even as her voice whispers, even as the tiny black letters take shape beneath her careful hand, there is always a quiet, sacred joy, a sense that even in this silent, shadowed world, there is light. Because for the nuns who worked in the scriptorium, writing was not just a skill, it was a light, a promise that their faith would live on, that their whispered prayers would shine even in the darkest night. You see a young novice, her fingers trembling slightly, her voice a quiet whispered murmur. How do you write so beautifully? How do you keep your hand so steady? Beside her, an older nun smiles, her voice a soft, gentle murmur. Patience, my child. Faith is a light that shines in every stroke. But even as they write, even as the tiny, delicate letters dance across the pale parchment, there is another brighter art, a light that shines in the darkness. You see it now. The delicate swirling designs that frame the words, tiny vibrant flowers of bright red, blue and green, swirling vines of bright gold, tiny shining birds that flutter on the cool pale surface. This is the work of the illuminator's nuns, whose quiet steady hands turn the sacred text into a dance of light. A light that shone even in the thick shadowed walls of the convent. You see a young nun, her fingers moving with careful, delicate skill, her brush dipping into the tiny polished shells of colored pigment, deep rich blue, from crushed lapis lazuli, warm golden red from saffron, bright glowing green from crushed malachite. Her voice is a soft, joyful murmur, blue for the heavens, gold for the light, green for the life of the earth. Beside her, an old nun smiles, her voice a calm, steady murmur, and silver for the light of faith. But this is not just decoration, it is a light, a whisper of faith that shines on the pale, shadowed page. Every swirl, every tiny flower, every bright shining bird is a promise that even in the darkest night there is light. You see Isabel again, her fingers brushing against the cool, smooth parchment, her voice a quiet, trembling whisper. I wish I could make something so beautiful. Beside her, an older nun smiles, her voice a soft, gentle murmur. You can, my child, with patience, with faith. But even as the young novices learn, even as their trembling hands trace the delicate swirling designs, there is always a quiet, sacred peace, a sense that even in the simplest line, there is light. A young novice carefully lifts a tiny polished silver brush, her fingers trembling, her voice a soft whispered prayer. For the glory of God, for the light of faith. But even as the tiny delicate designs take shape, even as the soft warm colors dance on the cool pale surface, there is another quiet, sacred tradition, a whisper of light that shines even in the shadows. You see an old nun carefully lifting a tiny polished gold leaf, its warm glowing surface catching the soft golden light of the candles. Her voice is a quiet, steady murmur. Gold is a light that never fades, a promise that shines even in the darkness. With slow, careful hands, she lifts a tiny, delicate brush, her fingers carefully pressing the thin, shining gold leaf onto the cool, smooth parchment. And in that quiet, sacred moment, the gold shines its warm golden light, a tiny spark of faith that dances in the shadowed room. But this light is not just for beauty. It is a promise, a whisper of faith that will shine even when the nuns themselves are gone. For these books are not just pages. They are lights, tiny whispered prayers that will shine for centuries. You see a young novice carefully tracing a delicate swirling vine of bright glowing green, her voice a soft, joyful whisper. This book will last forever, even when we are gone. Beside her, an older nun smiles, her voice a soft, gentle murmur. Yes, my child, a light that never fades. But even as the nuns write, even as their careful, steady hands turn the pale parchment into a dance of light, there is always a quiet, sacred joy, a sense that even in this silent, shadowed room, there is light. Because for the nuns of the medieval convent, the scriptorium is not just a place of writing, it is a light that shines even in the shadows. You see Isabel again, her fingers brushing against the cool, smooth parchment, her voice a quiet, trembling whisper. One day, I will write something beautiful. And even as the soft golden light of the candles dances on the cool pale parchment, even as the delicate swirling designs shine with bright glowing colors, you begin to see it, a quiet sacred world, a world where faith is a light, a promise whispered in ink, in gold and light. Because for the nuns of the medieval convent, writing is not just a skill, it is a light that shines even in the darkest night. The gentle glow of the scriptorium fades behind you, and now you find yourself in the cool, quiet heart of the convent, the cloister, a peaceful stone-arched walkway that frames a sheltered courtyard. Around you, the soft chant of hidden fountains drifts on the air, mingled with the distant rustle of leaves and the faint murmur of prayer. But here, in this sacred circle of shadow and sunlight, another solemn tradition unfolds. Because now it is time for sacred vows and silent sacrifices. For every nun, the decision to enter the convent was more than a lifetime commitment. It was a vow sealed by ritual, a promise whispered before God and the whole sisterhood. And these vows were not just words. They were a quiet covenant, a pact of poverty, chastity, and obedience sealed with the weight of heaven. You see the novices lined along the cloister's shaded arcades, their white wimples gleaming against the dark robes, their hands clasped in gentle prayer. Today is the day of profession, when they will take their final vows and become full members of the sisterhood. In the center of the courtyard, beneath a simple wooden cross, stands the abbess, her face calm but radiant, her eyes bright with solemn joy. She wears a finely embroidered veil, a sign of her authority, and in her hand she holds a small, polished chrism oil vessel, a silent symbol of blessing and consecration. One by one, the novices step forward, The first, a young woman with trembling hands, moves to kneel on the cool cobblestones. The abbess gently pours a few drops of chrism on her folded hands, her voice a soft, steady murmur. Receive the seal of the Holy Spirit. In poverty may you find richness. In chastity may you find love. In obedience may you find true freedom. The novice's voice is barely a whisper, but her words carry across the courtyard. I, Sister Helena, vow myself to Christ, poverty, chastity, and obedience until death. And with those words she stands her robe, falling in soft folds, her life irrevocably given. The sisters whisper an amen, their voices rising like gentle incense. Beside you, another novice trembles, her eyes bright with tears. She kneels, the abbess anoints her hands, and the silent promise echoes through the cloister. I, Sister Margaret, vow myself to Christ poverty, chastity, and obedience until death. And so it continues, each vow, a quiet sacrifice, each amen, a shared heartbeat of faith. Poverty means giving up all personal possessions. Chastity means surrendering all earthly love. Obedience means trusting God through the abbess and the rule. 3 promises. 3 shadows that bind each sister to a lifetime of hidden service. But even as the vows are spoken, there is a gentle light, a sense of peace, of purpose. The newly professed nuns stand in the soft sunlight, their white wimples a bright flame against the cool stone. Their eyes shine with quiet joy, their hearts filled with secret hope. You see Sister Helena again, her fingers brushing against the faint chrism oil stain on her hands, her voice a soft, joyful whisper. I am his. And Sister Margaret, her cheeks damp with tears, speaks to you in a quiet murmur. I am his. In this silent courtyard, amid the echo of ancient stones, you feel it a sacred hush, a promise sealed in oil and prayer, a whisper of sacrifice that shines brighter than any sun. For the medieval nun, the vows were not an end, but a beginning, a quiet path of service, of hidden sacrifices, of whispered devotion. And as the sisters move back into the shadowed halls, their robes swishing softly, you glimpse the true light of their world, faith unbroken, shining in the stillness. The echo of sacred vows fades behind you, and now you find yourself wandering through the convent's dimly lit corridors toward the dormitory. A long, narrow chamber lined with simple wooden beds, each draped in rough woolen blankets. The only light filters through high-arched windows, casting soft patterns on the cold stone floor. Here, amid the hush of sleeping nuns and the gentle creak of wooden floorboards, another form of devotion thrives, because now it is time to explore sisterhood and silent friendships. For medieval nuns, life inside the convent could be austere, even isolating, but it was also a place of unexpected intimacy. In this quiet world, bonds were forged not in words, but in shared silence, small gestures, and the unspoken understanding of another heart's journey. You see Sister Agnes helping the novice Sister Beatrice unthread a stubborn knot in her veil, her slender fingers deft and patient. They do not speak. A whispered thank you would break the sacred hush. Instead, Sister Beatrice meets Sister Agnes's gentle gaze, and for a moment, the burden of her knotted veil lifts along with the weight on her heart. This simple act of kindness is a mainstream historical fact. Medieval convents emphasized communal living, sharing chores, and comforts equally under the rule of Saint Benedict. But it also hints at a fringe tidbit. Some convent chronicles mention secret sister letters, tiny folded notes, passed between cells with words of encouragement, later discovered hidden in hymnals, suggesting a covert sisterly network. And yet historians still argue whether these notes were widespread or isolated incidents of rule breaking. Some believe they represented a natural human need for connection. Others see them as rare flickers of intimacy in an otherwise strictly regulated life. As you move deeper into the dormitory, you notice the neat rows of beds, each with a small wooden shelf holding a novice's few belongings, a chalice, a prayer book, a knotted piece of wool for comfort. At night, these shelves become altars of memory. Sister Matilda's shelf bears a small polished pebble from her childhood stream, a silent promise of home. Sister Cecilia's holds a sprig of lavender pressed between parchment, its scent a discreet balm for anxious dreams. In this shared stillness, even breathing becomes an act of community. A young sister struggling with homesickness rubs the shoulder of the sister next to her as they rise for Compline, an unspoken reassurance that she need not wander her doubts alone. Yet the convent also harbored quiet tensions. Historians still argue whether rivalries over sewing quality or reading speed sometimes turned into whispered feuds, disrupting the vaunted sisterly harmony. Anecdotes of nighttime pillow fights, always hushed and brief, linger in folklore, though convent rules forbade such frivolity. But for every moment of tension, there were deeper bonds of compassion. When Sister Eleanor fell ill, the entire community knelt outside her cell each night, offering silent prayers in the dark hall. No words were exchanged yet. Their unified presence became her greatest comfort, a living chorus of solidarity. Even the daily work in the garden nurtured hidden friendships. Sisters worked side by side, tending roses, exchanging a look that spoke volumes. I see your struggles. I'm here. In the garden's quiet rhythms, companionship bloomed as surely as the flowers. And at vespers, with the choir sang in candlelit unison, the sisters felt each other's presence more strongly than any spoken greeting. Their joined voices were a tapestry of support, blending individual imperfections into a shared melody, proof that even in silence, they were never truly alone. In this world of whispered chants and unspoken confidences, sisterhood was the light that guided them. Through acts of kindness, shared solitude, and the occasional secret note, they built a community of hearts, proof that even behind thick walls and austere vows, human connection finds a way to bloom. The hush of the dormitory fades behind you as you step into the shadowed glow of the convent's small oratory, a private chapel hung with faded tapestries and lit by a single flickering candle. The walls seemed to breathe with centuries of whispered devotion, and here, amid the silent stone, a different kind of light flickers into view, because now it is time for visions, miracles, and quiet doubts. For some nuns, the cloister's silence was broken by more than just whispered prayers. It was pierced by visions of light and whispers from the divine. Take Sister Agnes, for example. One moonlit night, she claimed to see a glowing figure at the altar, its gentle voice urging her to heal the sick. The next day, the convent's infirmary recorded an uncanny recovery. An elderly sister's fever broke without explanation, just as Agnes knelt at her bedside. This mainstream fact, miracle stories often became part of a convent's lore, is joined by an intriguing fringe tidbit legend, holds that a hidden miracle book once circulated among the sisters, filled with cryptic symbols tracking these events. Historians still argue whether that notebook truly existed or was a later invention by pious hagiographers. In the oratory's half-light, you can almost see the faded echoes of those visions, a soft glow behind the carved oak altar, the distant whisper of a voice comforting a grieving novice. And in that hush you sense both awe and uncertainty, because faith's light can cast shadows of doubt. Sister Beatrice, ever devout, once confessed to the abbess that she feared her visions were the product of too little sleep and too many late-night vigils. The abbess, with her calm authority, reminded her gently that even Saint Teresa wrestled with uncertainty. Doubt is the shadow of faith, she whispered, not its enemy. So the sisters knelt, sometimes trembling between hope and fear. A late afternoon hush in the oratory might be broken by a sudden murmur. Do you feel that warmth on your brow? Or did you see that faint shimmer by the stained glass? Each question kindled comfort or anxiety in equal measure. Yet even skeptics found solace. When Sister Margaret's sight failed in old age, she confessed that her true vision was the loving hands of her sisters guiding her through the cloister. Historians still debate whether such blind nuns ever received genuine visions, but in the convent's memory, every whispered miracle was a balm to the soul. And as you linger in the half-light, you realize that in this silent world, miracles were as much about community as the divine. A shared comfort and sorrow, a gentle touch and anguish, became miracles in their own right, quiet acts of grace that needed no heavenly spark. Here, amid worn stone and flickering candlelight, the nuns lived with visions of glory and doubts of the heart, discovering that even in shadow faith's gentle glow could light the way. The soft glow of the oratory fades behind you, and you now tread the silent hall leading to the private cells, tiny austere rooms where the nuns retreat for study, sleep, and secret thoughts. Each cell is a quiet stone chamber, barely larger than a bed, its single window set high in the wall, letting in only a sliver of moonlight. But within these humble spaces, hearts sometimes stir against their vows in a whisper of forbidden longing, because now it is time for forbidden longings and secret letters. Take Sister Catherine, renowned for her devotion and gentle kindness. Historians still argue whether her hidden love affair was real or a later romantic myth. But convent folklore insists she fell quietly in love with a visiting friar who taught Latin grammar. They say she pressed her heartache into tiny folded notes, each one sealed with a petal of myrtle, secretly slipped beneath the door to him. In the muted hush of the convent night, these notes traveled furtively along cold stone corridors. A tiny scrap of parchment might read, "Your voice lingers in my prayers more than any hymn." Each letter was a spark of life in an otherwise shadowed world, but also a perilous betrayal of the vow of chastity. You see Sister Catherine's cell, now a single wooden bed, a hard plank desk, and on it a folded note edged with myrtle petals. The ink is faded, the words trembling on the page. Beneath the bed, a careful hiding place in the floorboard holds more letters, her hopes and fears pressed into parchment. Yet even this secret risked discovery. In some convent records, an old abbess's admonitions survive. Let hearts be steeled against a worldly fire, lest they burn the sisterhood. Still, one chronicler hints that many nuns indulged such secret longings, chasing love's echo even behind sacred walls. Whether these tales reflect reality or later sensationalism remains a matter of debate. In another cell, you find Sister Matilda's hidden journal. She sketched the visiting friar's gentle features in tiny charcoal drawings, then tore the page and hid it beneath her prayer mat. Her sister nuns claim she wept for weeks after his departure, missing his laughter more than any spent hour of prayer. And yet some nuns channeled longing into holy metaphor. They prayed for Christ's bridegroom's embrace with a fervor surpassing any earthly desire. Historians still argue whether these mystics truly saw Christ or simply projected human love onto divine visions. In this hush, you realize that forbidden letters and hidden yearnings weren't merely acts of rebellion, they were proof of life's complexity. Even cloistered hearts beat with earthly ache, reminding us that faith and desire often walk a whispered line. The secret silence of the private cells trails off as you emerge into the cool, torchlit grandeur of the abbess's chamber, a room both stately and serene, where the convent's mother superior held court. Carved wooden pews line the walls, richly embroidered tapestries hang like silent sentinels, and a low, ornate desk bears the records of generations. But behind this dignified calm lies a power as real as any kingdom's crown. Because now it is time to meet abbesses, the powerful women of the convent. For medieval nuns, the abbess was more than a spiritual guide. She was the convent's CEO, treasurer, disciplinarian, and diplomat, all rolled into one. Mainstream records show they managed substantial estates granted by kings and nobles, a historical fact that underscores their worldly clout. Yet a quirky tidbit suggests some nuns secretly envied the abbess's fine silk robes, rumored to rival even a countess's court garb. Historians still argue whether abbesses wielded genuine political influence or simply administered property on behalf of male patrons. But here in the hushed strength of her chamber, the debate feels alive. Does the heavy gold ring on her finger symbolize her spiritual authority or a literal claim to the convent's treasure? You see Abbess Gertrude now seated behind her desk, her gray hair hidden beneath an embroidered veil of deep blue. She lifts a parchment sealed with wax, her voice calm and resonant. We must negotiate with the local baron for timber rights. Her authority is absolute. Every nun in the courtyard obeys her word as though it echoed the divine. Yet power carried shadows. Rumor whispers that one medieval abbess kept a secret ledger detailing clandestine loans to local merchants at generous interest. Such tales suggest that convent coffers were more than pious. They were profitable, though skeptics debate whether these accounts truly existed or simply reflected distrust of female autonomy. Still, no one could deny the abbess's role in diplomacy. When a dispute over sheep pastures threatened the convent's peace, it was Gertrude who rode into town on horseback, robed in rich wool, and brokered a truce with the local lord. The image of a nun negotiating land rights remains a fringe, yet delightful detail in dusty chronicles, and under her gaze the convent thrived. Sisters against famine widows sought refuge here, and the community's storehouses brimmed with grain. The abbess's decisions echoed far beyond these walls. She was a beacon of both faith and practical wisdom. But sacred authority also demanded stern discipline. Late one stormy night, when two novices conspired to sneak into town for sweet wine, it was Gertrude who meted out penance, hours of kneeling on cold stones, followed by silent reflection. Historians still argue whether such punishments were cruel or compassionately corrective. So as you stand in her chamber, you feel the weight of quiet power, the blend of spiritual and secular that only an abbess could command. Her candlelit silhouette, framed by ancient stones, embodies an unexpected truth. Within these cloistered walls lived women who shaped land hearts and history itself. Because for medieval nuns, the abbess was no mere administrator. She was a living testament to faith leadership and the gentle wielding of authority. Even amid whispered doubts and hidden intrigues, her legacy remains a silent crown worn in candlelight. You step from the hushed intimacy of the private cells into the broad torchlit expanse of the abbess's chamber, a space that feels both regal and austere. The thick stone walls are draped with richly woven tapestries depicting saints and angels, their colors muted by centuries of candle smoke. A heavy wooden desk carved with interlaced vine motifs stands at one end, piled high, with scrolls, ledgers, and petitions. Behind it sits the abbess, her presence both calming and formidable, like a queen whose crown is a simple embroidered veil. For medieval nuns, the abbess was far more than a spiritual guide. She was the convent's chief administrator, financial manager, and even its diplomat. Mainstream records confirm abbesses often controlled substantial estates, collected rents, and negotiated with local lords to secure timber pasture rights or protection, a fact that underscores their real-world clout. Yet tucked away in convent rumor lore is the peculiar detail that some nuns quietly envied the abbess's fine silk robes, said to rival those of minor nobility, suggesting that wealth and splendor coexisted with vows of poverty. You approach the desk, noticing a wax-sealed letter addressed to the local baron, a request for additional firewood to heat the infirmary through the coming winter. The Abbess Matilda, her gray hair neatly tucked beneath a midnight blue wimple, breaks the seal with calm precision. Her voice resonates in the vaulted space. Read it aloud, she instructs, and a young sister obliges. As each word echoes, you sense the weight of her authority. Each petition must be phrased carefully, for her words can alter the convent's fate. A curious fringe tidbit surfaces here. Some convent chronicles mention a hidden ledger called the Liber Pietatis, rumored to record secret loans made by the abbess to merchants at discreet interest rates, thus allowing the convent to fund charitable works and building repairs without relying solely on tithes or noble patronage. Historians still argue whether this ledger truly existed or was a later invention by chroniclers wary of female financial autonomy. Some scholars view it as evidence of pragmatic stewardship. Others dismiss it as moral panic in the records. Abbess Matilda listens to the petition, her keen eyes flicking to the faces of her sisters, then back to the scroll. With a firm nod, she dictates a gracious but firm reply, ensuring the baron will supply the wood in exchange for medical care for his household when needed. Such diplomacy was a routine task. Abbesses negotiated land disputes, arranged dowries, and sometimes intervened in local feuds. One well-documented example, a mainstream historical fact, recounts how Abbess Hildegard of Bingen secured a truce between rival counts, hosting them under her roof and brokering terms, an act reflecting both political savvy and deep faith. Yet authority brought tensions. When rumors spread that Matilda accepted bribes to expedite pardons for wayward sisters, the convent's reputation teetered. Monastic visitors from distant abbeys raised eyebrows, and a visiting bishop launched an inquiry. Documents state he found no formal evidence, another instance where historians still argue whether convent autonomy made abbesses vulnerable to slander or whether such scandals reveal genuine misuse of power. You watch as Matilda turns to her chief steward, Sister Agnes, and gently but firmly instructs her to allocate extra funds for repairing the orphanage wing. The steward bows, scribing new entries in the convent's financial rolls. Their interaction is seamless, a testament to the chain of command that balanced spiritual leadership with practical management. The abbess then moves to a smaller, simpler desk in the corner, its surface clear save for a single polished wooden box. Lifting the lid, she reveals a set of iron keys, symbols of her authority over all convent gates. Legend claims a medieval abbess once held the keys to the city treasury by royal mandate, allowing her to safeguard the city's jewels during a siege. While some historians question the authenticity of that tale, it underscores the symbolic power of the keys to lock away sin to open doors of charity, to hold the spiritual and temporal realms in balance. As dusk falls and the chamber's torchlight deepens, you notice the abbess pausing before a small niche, holding a simple wooden cross. She kneels, fingers pressing against the cold wood, and murmurs a prayer not for herself, but for the sisters in the infirmary. Despite her worldly duties, her heart remains anchored in compassion. That blend of administrative rigor and pastoral care made abbesses revered, even feared by local communities. They were clerical peers to bishops in some regions, their decrees carrying ecclesiastical weight. But power required discipline. A chronicler's marginal note records that when a group of young novices attempted to sneak out for a late-night festival in town, it was Matilda who, robe flowing, personally apprehended them, delivering a gentle yet stern rebuke before sending them to hours of stone floor penance. Historians still argue whether such punishments were harsh or compassionately corrective. As you stand in her chamber, you feel the weight of quiet power, the blend of spiritual and secular that only an abbess could command. Her candlelit silhouette, framed by ancient stones, embodies an unexpected truth within these cloistered walls. Lived women who shaped land hearts and history itself. Because for medieval nuns, the abbess was no mere administrator. She embodied a gentle, formidable authority. Her realm was both sacred and secular, her rule a testament to faith's power to transform stones into sanctuaries and vows into vibrant communities. The hush of the abbess's chamber fades as you enter a cooler, quieter wing, the common infirmary, a realm of hushed footsteps, the faint scent of healing balms and low moans of the sick. Here, flags of white linen mark narrow beds, and simple wooden stools line the walls. Yet, amid the stillness and the soft flicker of candlelight, a profound care unfolds, because now it is time for healing the sick, the nuns' infirmary. For medieval convents, caring for the ill was both a sacred duty and a practical necessity. Records note that many nuns served as de facto physicians in their regions, an established fact reflecting the convent's role as hospital, hospice, and healing center. Yet a curious anecdote persists that some nuns used tiny silver spoons to measure poultices by taste, believing the bitterness indicated potency, a fringe detail scholars debate as either clever folk medicine or fanciful legend. You see Sister Magdalene kneeling beside a frail sister's bed, her gentle hands wrapping a warm bandage soaked in comfrey tea, an herb known for its reputed ability to soothe wounds and bone fractures. As she smooths the cloth, her voice is a calm, comforting murmur. "Drink this broth, my sister. It will warm your bones." In offering both broth and balm, the nuns practiced holistic care centuries before modern hospitals. Nearby, a novice stirs a bubbling herbal decoction, sprigs of rosemary for circulation, crushed garlic for its antibacterial whispers, and a few petals of calendula to soothe skin irritations. She records each ingredient in a faded leather-bound nurse's register, a practice historians often cite as evidence of meticulous monastic medical records, though some argue these entries were more ritual than rigorous pharmacology. Yet even as herbs simmer and bandages are applied, doubt and debate swirl behind the doorless beds. Some sisters clasp blotting papers to their brows, inhaling aromatic rose water to ease headaches, a popular remedy whose efficacy medieval physicians still argued over. One well-known case involves Sister Helena, whose persistent migraines reportedly vanished after she slept beneath a pillow stuffed with lavender, though skeptics questioned whether the relief came from rest rather than floral fragrance. In the infirmary's gentle half-light, you notice a small shelf bearing vials of Venice turpentine, ambergris elixir, and powdered coral ingredients imported at great expense and reserved for critical cases. Such rare materials underscore the convent's wealth, but also its compassion. The nuns spared no cost when life and health were at stake. An elderly sister, her skin pale and drawn, lies reclining as Sister Agnes applies a salve of wicked nightshade, a tricky herb whose dosage teetered on therapeutic or toxic. As Agnes works, she murmurs a soft prayer, "Saint Hildegard, guide my hands." It's a tacit nod to the famed Benedictine abbess who authored early medical treatises blending spiritual invocation with empirical care. Yet ethical tensions rose in these halls. Historians still debate whether some nuns experimented with more dangerous compounds like arsenic-laced remedies to treat plague victims, or whether such rumors were fueled by fear of female practitioners. Convent chronicles sometimes mention suspicious recoveries and unexplained deaths, hinting at the blurred line between healing and harm. But more often, healing arrived through simple acts of human kindness, a cool cloth pressed to the fevered brow, a whispered lullaby in the dark, a steady hand offering water from a wooden ladle. When Sister Catherine, once stricken by a fierce fever, stirred at dawn after days of delirium, she awoke to find the entire sisterhood kneeling in silent vigil, a collective miracle no ledger could quantify. Babies abandoned at the convent gate also found sanctuary here. Nursed alongside feverish sisters, they grew under the watchful eyes of caring nuns, another example of convent hospitals doubling as foundling homes. Records show these infants often survived better here than in crowded city streets, though some chroniclers lamented the blurred lines between sacred care and social relief. Amid these acts of mercy, the infirmary's open windows offered glimpses of the cloistered garden beyond fresh air and dappled sunlight borrowed to aid convalescence. Even in winter, when snow lay thick, nuns lifted pale sisters to the garden's sheltered archway, believing the crisp air carried healing whispers. You watch Sister Matilda, her hair silver beneath her white wimple, Consult a small vellum manuscript, Hilary's alphabetical compendium of remedies, and cross-reference an ailment with an ancient Greek aphorism. Her calm authority reassures novices juggling both scripture and salves. And as the candles gutter and the night deepens, the infirmary's soft murmurs become lullaby whispered prayers mingled with gentle breathing, the faint hiss of warming embers, and the subtle stirring of hope. Here healing was as spiritual as it was physical, a reminder that within these shadowed walls, compassion and faith wove together in the quiet art of care. Because for the nuns of the medieval convent, the infirmary was more than a hospital. It was a light in the darkness, a testament that even in an age of scant medicine, love and prayer could bring solace and strength. The healing hush of the infirmary fades as you step into the shadowed corridor leading to the convent's mortuary chapel, a small vaulted room where the dying were tended and the dead prepared for burial. The air is cool and still, and the only light comes from a few candles placed beside a plain oak bier. Yet here, amid the hush of farewell and the soft scent of myrrh, another solemn ritual unfolds, because now it is time for death funerals and the promise of heaven. For medieval nuns, caring for souls at the end of life was as sacred a duty as healing the living. Records show that many convents maintained detailed necrologies lists of sisters and benefactors, marking their deaths with prayers and anniversaries, a mainstream fact highlighting the community's continual remembrance. Yet surviving a single plague season could mean burying dozens of sisters, and some mortuary chapels bear tiny graffiti crosses scratched by sisters too weary to kneel. You enter the chapel to find Sister Luciana kneeling beside the bier, her veil drawn low. A young nun, Sister Beata, gently arranges a simple white shroud over the limp form of Sister Agnes, who passed in the infirmary before dawn. Their voices are low murmuring the office of the dead in haunting Latin requiem, Aeternum dona eis Domine. As the words rise and fall, you feel the weight of centuries of farewells, each prayer, a promise that death is not an end, but a passage to heavenly light. A curious detail lingers in convent lore. Some nuns tucked a sprig of lavender or rosemary into the coffin to soothe the journey, believing its fragrance guided the soul. Scholars still debate whether this was a widespread custom or the invention of later romantics, but a few burial ledgers mention herb gifts alongside pall entries, hinting at fragrant farewells. Once the office concludes, the abbess enters, her face serene. With slow, prayerful grace, she places a small gold crucifix on the chest, a gift from a benefactor, then sprinkles holy water. May her soul find rest in God's light, she intones. For women who spent their lives in prayer, this final blessing was the culmination of their vocation. Following the short service, the sisters form a silent procession, each walking barefoot behind the bier, their veiled faces bowed. At the churchyard, they lower the shrouded figure into the earth, and someone digs a cross shape with a simple wooden stake marking the grave. No tombstones here. Humility dictates a return to dust. Yet in some wealthier abbeys, benefactors' graves once bore small stone markers suggesting a tension between humility and remembrance, an issue historians still debate. After the burial, the convent returns to the mortuary chapel, where a plain meal of stale bread and watered wine awaits those who mourned. In famine years, sisters might share even that small portion with local beggars, reflecting their vow of charity. A weary novice once whispered her shock at learning that bread she deemed barely enough sustained both mourners and strangers, an act of radical hospitality that shone with compassion. Back in the chapel, the abbess opens the necrology and reads the name of the departed sister aloud, followed by a moment of silent prayer. Each mourner intones Amen, sealing the promise that every year on the death's anniversary, prayers will rise for the soul, a ritual guaranteeing the deceased perpetual remembrance. As candles gutter and the air turns colder, you sense that in this world of quiet farewells, death was met with dignity, ritual, and unwavering faith. Sisters who once scrubbed cloister floors or penned illuminated manuscripts now rested beneath the same stones, awaiting the resurrection. Their passing was mourned with tears and incense and celebrated as the final step to eternal light. Because for the nuns of the medieval convent, death was not an end. It was a promise that through prayer and communal memory, every soul would find peace in heaven's sacred embrace. The chill of the mortuary chapel's candles fades as you step into the library, a lofty vaulted room lined with heavy wooden shelves bearing leather-bound volumes. Here in the hush between whispered prayers and nightly vigils, another light glimmers the quiet brilliance of saintly legends and lasting traditions. For medieval convents, stories of holy women fueled devotion and inspired novices. Hagiographies, biographies of saints, were both read aloud and performed in simple dramas, ensuring that the memory of saintly nuns endured. One mainstream example is Saint Ethelthryth, an Anglo-Saxon abbess famed for miraculous healings in the 7th century. Yet a charming fringe tale suggests she once turned water into mead for thirsty sisters, a miracle debated by scholars as either literal or allegorical. You see the sisters gathered on cushioned benches, their wimples gleaming in the soft lamplight, while Sister Juliana reads aloud from a richly illuminated book. The page depicts Saint Bridget of Sweden receiving visions, her eyes uplifted to a glowing crucifix. As Juliana's calm voice intones, "And behold, the heavens opened," you sense the convent's heartbeat, quicken history, and myth entwined. Between chapters, the nuns exchange knowing glances, Historians still argue whether these hagiographies were intended as spiritual instruction or communal entertainment, but here they serve both showing novices the heights of piety and offering a gentle respite from routine. On a nearby shelf, you spot a small, leather-bound book of local legends, its title faded. It contains stories of obscure 12th century nuns credited with calming storms on the nearby river, an event recorded in parish records but amplified in oral tradition. Some scholars dismiss these tales as folklore. Others argue they reflect real prayer vigils held to protect vessels, reminding us how faith and daily life intertwined. Sister Catherine, seated beside you, brushes her fingers over the gilded edges of the page. "I hope one day they write our story," she murmurs. In her whisper, you hear both humility and yearning, a desire to be remembered like the Holy Foremothers. In a quiet corner, the abbess pins a new feast day. Notice to the wall tomorrow will celebrate a lesser-known nun who devoted her life to feeding the poor using only gifts from alms. Though her name never reached canonization, the convent honors her yearly, ensuring her example lights each generation's path. Historians still debate which nun truly founded that tradition. Conflicting convent chronicles offer different names. Yet each year, the sisters reenact her charitable acts, sharing bread with local widows, keeping the legend alive, whether fact or heartfelt memory. As Juliana closes the hagiography with a soft snap, the sisters rise and offer a quiet hymn, their voices weaving ancient legend into living practice. You feel how these stories, whether of miracles or simple acts of kindness, shape the convent's soul, binding past and present in a tapestry of faith. Because in the silent halls of this medieval convent, saintly legends and humble traditions were not just tales, they were beacons guiding every sister toward a lasting light. The flickering torchlight of the mortuary chapel fades behind you as you step into a narrow vaulted corridor where the air feels charged with tension. This is the realm of nuns who rebelled. Despite vows of obedient silence, history whispers of convents where some sisters dared to defy the rules, driven by conscience, compassion, or the simple hunger for freedom. Take the case of Sister Marcelina, whose story appears in an early 14th century visitation record. She refused to observe the Lenten fast after witnessing villagers collapse from starvation. Historians still argue whether her protest was an isolated act of mercy or part of a wider movement of pious insubordination, but the record shows the prioress threatened her with penance, yet could not quell Marcelina's quiet defiance. You walk past a heavy oak door, inscribed with iron rings, entering the cloister's old refectory by moonlight. Their legend says Marcelina stood on a bench and tore off her veil, declaring, "We must feed God's hungry children before we please God with our fast." The sisters and a visiting bishop balked at the spectacle, but her gesture sparked an annual charitably sanctioned extra loaf distribution at that convent. Whether that loaf tradition truly stems from her act remains a matter of debate, but every year sisters still bless the extra bread in her memory. Another striking example appears in a mid-15th century chronicle, Sister Beatrix of St. Cleves, who resisted a papal order to send novices to a remote foundation plagued by brigands. She barricaded the chapter house door with benches locking out the abbess until the order was rescinded. The abbess's ledger notes the expense of repairing the door and a terse condemnation of those who fancy rebellion for zeal, hinting at an undercurrent of spirited dissent. Yet not all rebellions sprang from charity or safety. Some nuns chafed under strict enclosure rules. In one anecdote questioned by scholars as either folklore or factual, Sister Honoria bribed stable hands to smuggle her out under cover of darkness so she could attend her brother's wedding, clutching her habit in one hand and her concealed rosary in the other. Upon her return, the abbess confronted her, but moved by Honoria's tears and doubts, gave her a penance of extra prayers rather than expulsion a mercy that sparked similar pleas for leniency across the region. Even learned sisters joined acts of quiet defiance. Historical records hint that some scriptoria workers covertly copied forbidden texts, medical treatises by Galen, or poetry by Ovid, preserving knowledge that ecclesiastical authorities deemed too secular. While some scholars label these clandestine scriptorium runs as myth-surviving manuscripts with hidden marginalia, suggest at least occasional rule-bending to safeguard learning. And in the shadows of the infirmary, you encounter another kind of rebellion nuns who refuse to stigmatize disease patients labeled unclean. One 13th century account records Sister Claudia defying abbess instructions to isolate plague victims, instead singing hymns over them and refusing to don extra veils, believing spiritual care outweighed ritual purity. That act of compassion reportedly saved dozens, though church investigators accused her of endangering souls. These rebellions shared a common thread. They sprang from faith, not pride. The sisters risked penance fines or even banishment, yet felt compelled to follow conscience over rule. Historians still argue the extent of such defiance, but convent visitations and local chronicles preserve whispers of these defiant acts, ensuring they echo through time. As you leave the dim corridor behind you, sense how even the most cloistered lives contained sparks of resistance, reminders that obedience and faith need not extinguish the human spirit's yearning for justice, compassion, and freedom. The echo of hushed rebellion fades as you step into the convent's celestial classroom, a vaulted chamber lined with wooden desks, faded frescoes of learning saints, and shelves of well-thumbed manuscripts. Here, amid the soft glow of candlelight and the gentle rustle of pages, you discover the convent's secret legacy, because now it is time for education and hidden knowledge. For medieval nuns, the cloister was more than a place of prayer. It was often one of the few centers of advanced learning available to women. Mainstream records show that many convents maintained schools teaching Latin grammar, scripture, and even basic arithmetic to novices and local girls alike. Yet a fringe detail whispers of secret lessons in astronomy where nuns studied stars to time their nocturnal vigils, an early unofficial women's observatory debated by scholars as either allegory or subtle defiance of ecclesiastical restrictions. You see Sister Helena, quill in hand, instructing two novices in the intricacies of Latin declensions, her voice calm but animated. Aquila is nominative. Aquila becomes genitive, understand. She uses examples drawn from monastic hymns, weaving language study seamlessly into spiritual practice. Behind her, a small group of brighter sisters pores over a diagram of the Ptolemaic cosmos, sketching planetary orbits in charcoal on whitewashed walls, a practice some church visitors frowned upon, but abbesses protected as part of divine order. Yet this intellectual ferment extended beyond language and astronomy. In the scriptorium, advanced texts by Hildegard of Bingen circulated detailing the medicinal properties of plants alongside mystical visions. Historians still argue whether nuns fully grasped Hildegard's scientific insights or revered her visions alone, but marginalia in surviving manuscripts reveal sisters annotating recipes for herbal remedies, blending faith with empirical observation. In a dim corner, Sister Matilda tutors a young novice in music notation, guiding her through the subtle rhythms of plain chant. The convent's library preserves a rare treatise on musical modes, its origin uncertain. Some scholars attribute it to an itinerant monk, others to an ingenious nun compiler. Either way, these musical lessons enriched liturgy and cultivated a nuanced ear for harmony, creating choristers praised at neighboring abbeys. Beyond the cloister's walls lay students gathered for lessons in arithmetic learning, to calculate tithes and measure land for abbey estates. The abbess ensured these practical skills supported both convent economics and local girls' futures, though some church councils questioned laywomen's advanced education. Yet convent rolls list dozens of pupils whose literacy rates surpassed even many parish priests. Even moral philosophy found its way into cloistered debates. In a rarely recorded 14th century convent council, sisters discussed Augustine's theories on free will, an extraordinary exercise in abstract theology usually reserved for cathedral schools. Though some theologians derided such discussions as presumptuous, the sisters defended them as necessary for deepening their vows of obedience and love. And hidden knowledge wasn't limited to texts. The infirmary's herbarium, an illuminated compendium of plant lore, combined folk recipes with learned commentary its pages revealing experiments in tinctures and poultices. Some marginal notes suggest sisters tested mixtures on each other under controlled conditions, a clandestine precursor to modern clinical trials. Whether legend or fact, these notes reflect a culture of careful observation and shared inquiry. As candles gutter and scholars close their books, you sense the convent's enduring gift, a sanctuary where women preserved and expanded knowledge across disciplines despite broader societal limits. Their silent libraries, hidden observatories, and lively debates ensured that every whispered prayer also carried a spark of intellectual curiosity. Because in the medieval convent's hidden classrooms, education was a light nurturing minds and spirits alike and leaving a legacy of learning that shone long after the last candle faded. The convent's grand halls grow still as dusk deepens into night. Candle flames gutter softly, casting gentle shadows on the worn stone, and the faint scent of lavender drifts through the silent corridors. In every cell, every chapel, every hidden scriptorium, the day's final prayers have been whispered. Now only the soft murmur of candle wax and the quiet rustle of veils remain. Close your eyes and feel the cool touch of ancient stone. Beneath your hands, the warmth of woolen robes wrapped around you. Imagine the gentle hush of whispered Latin chants, each syllable a tender thread in the tapestry of night. You are surrounded by the devoted sisters, their quiet sacrifices, their hidden studies, their whispered miracles. Breathe deeply, letting the faint fragrance of comfrey and rosemary fill your senses. Recall the gentle kindness of Sister Agnes tending the infirmary, the bold compassion of Sister Marcelina's defiance, the steadfast authority of Abbess Matilda guiding her flock with grace. Each memory is a flicker of light in the dark. Now let the soft cadence of prayer and the echo of turning pages lull your thoughts. Release the day's burdens as a nun sets down her quill, knowing they are safe in this circle of faith. Feel the quiet solidarity of sisterhood, the gentle strength of vows that bind hearts across centuries. Sleep draws near, wrapped in candlelit corridors and the promise of heaven's eternal dawn. Let your dreams carry you through the cloister's peaceful cloaked gardens, past the glowing manuscripts, and into the promise of rest beyond ages. Rest well, dear traveler. May the convent's quiet light guide you through the night and into morning's gentle glow. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.